Howdy and good morning, friends and faithful listeners. My name is Jen. I am the host of this podcast, and I'm so excited that you're here with me this morning. We're going to be discussing 2 Kings 23, the entire chapter. It is a long chapter, but I think it's going to be a very interesting episode for you guys because I'm going to go into some of the gods that Judah was worshiping and how Josiah completely destroys them. So I hope you guys have been doing well this week. I haven't heard from you guys in a while. I haven't gotten a prayer request in quite a bit. So if you have a prayer request, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email address is listed in the description of this episode. And you can reach out to me if you have a prayer request or if you just want to talk to me about how you found the podcast. I am happy to get your emails. So you will find my email address listed in the description of this episode. But let's go ahead and read 2 Kings 23, the entire thing. It is quite long. It's 37 verses, so that's quite a bit. So let's jump right in. Grab your cup of coffee or your cup of tea, and as usual, I'll be reading from the WEB. The king sent, and they gathered to him all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. The king went up to Yahweh's house, and all the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, with the priests, the prophets, and all the people, both small and great. And he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant which was found in Yahweh's house. The king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before Yahweh to walk after Yahweh and to keep his commandments, his testimonies, and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul, to confirm the words of this covenant that were written in this book, and all the people agreed to the covenant. The king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, and the priests of the second order, and the keepers of the threshold, to bring out Yahweh's temple all the vessels that were made for Baal, for the Asherah, and for all the army of the sky. And he burned them outside of Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron, and carried their ashes to Bethel. He got rid of the idolatrous priests, whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah, and in the places around Jerusalem. Those also who burned incense to Baal, to the sun, to the moon, to the planets, and to all the army of the sky. He brought out the Asherah from Yahweh's house, outside of Jerusalem, to the brook Kidron, and burned it at the brook Kidron, to beat it to dust, and to cast its dust on the graves of the common people. He broke down the houses of the male shrine prostitutes that were in Yahweh's house, where the women wove hangings for the Asherah. He brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah and defiled the high places where the priests had burned incense, from Geba to Beersheba. And he broke down the high places of the gates that were at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were on a man's left hand at the gate of the city. Nevertheless, the priests of the high places didn't come up to Yahweh's altar in Jerusalem, but they ate unleavened bread among their brothers. He defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Moloch. He took away the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun, at the entrance of Yahweh's house by the room of Nathan Melech, the officer who was in the court, and he burned the chariots of the sun with fire. The king broke down the altars that were on the roof of the upper room of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars which Manasseh had made in the two courts of Yahweh's house, and beat them down from there, and he cast their dust into the brook Kidron. The king defiled the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the mountain of corruption, which Solomon the king of Israel had built for Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Sidonians, and for Chemish, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon. He broke in pieces the pillars, cut down the Asherah poles, and filled their places with men's bones. Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel and the high place which Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made, even that altar and the high place he broke down. And he burned the high place and beat it to dust, and burned the Asherah. As Josiah turned himself, he spied the tombs that were there in the mountain, and he sent and took the bones out of the tombs, and burned them on the altar, and defiled it, according to Yahweh's word which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed these things. Then he said, "What monument is that which I see?" The men of the city told him, "It's the tomb of the man of God, who came from Judah and proclaimed these things that you have done against the altar of Bethel." He said, "Let him be. Let no one move his bones." So they let his bones alone, with the bones of the prophet who came out of Samaria. All the houses also of the high places that were in the cities of Samaria, which the kings of Israel had made to provoke Yahweh to anger, Josiah took away, and did to them according to all the acts that he had done in Bethel. He killed all the priests of the high places that were there, on the altars, and burned men's bones on them, and he returned to Jerusalem. The king commanded all the people, saying, "Keep the Passover to Yahweh your God, as it is written in the book of this covenant." Surely there was not kept such a Passover from the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor of the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was kept to Yahweh in Jerusalem. Moreover, Josiah removed those who had familiar spirits, the wizard and the teraphim, and the idols and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, that he might confirm the words of the law which were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in Yahweh's house. There was no king like him before him, who turned to Yahweh with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, and there was none like him who arose after him. Notwithstanding, Yahweh didn't turn from the fierceness of his great wrath, with which his anger burned against Judah, because of all the provocation with which Manasseh had provoked him. Yahweh said, "I will also remove Judah out of my sight, as I have removed Israel, and I will cast off this city which I have chosen, even Jerusalem, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there." Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and all that he did, aren't they written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him. But Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo when he saw him. His servants carried him dead in a chariot from Megiddo, brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. The people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him, and made him king in his father's place. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, according to all that his fathers had done. Pharaoh Necho put him in bonds at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he put the land to a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. Jehoiakim gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give the money according to the commandment of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and the gold out of the people of the land, from everyone according to his assessment, to give it to Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebidah, the daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah. He did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, according to all that his fathers had done. That may have been the most reading I've ever done on a podcast episode, but the reason I decided not to break up this chapter was because it all connected very well, obviously. Firstly, Josiah goes through his entire religious reform. Then he tells Jerusalem and Judah largely to worship God only, and then he dies. And then his sons take over. So there's really no good stopping place, honestly, with this passage. So I decided to just read it all. And it turned out to be quite a lot of reading. So let's start out in the first paragraph, verses 1 through 3, and see what Josiah is doing here. So it says, "The king sent," meaning Josiah, "and they gathered to him all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. And the king went up to Yahweh's house, and all the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, with the priests, the prophets, and all the people, both small and great, and he read in their hearing the words of the book of the covenant, which was found in Yahweh's house." Now here's what's really interesting about this. In the last chapter, Josiah the king had a heart for God. He had a heart for Yahweh's temple, and he actually told Hilkiah the high priest to put money into the temple so that they could rebuild it. And as Hilkiah the high priest, was going through all the rooms, organizing things, getting it ready to be rebuilt, he found the covenant of the book of the law, meaning the Old Testament law. He found it in the temple. Who knows how long it was there? Who knows how long since it had been touched? It was thrown away in storage somewhere. And Hilkiah the high priest ended up finding it. Because, God's temple, it wasn't huge, but it had a lot of rooms. It had a lot of storage, like on the outside of the temple. And so it seems that God's law, which was supposed to be what all the priests were following in order to upkeep and maintain the temple was just like tossed away in storage somewhere. So Hilkiah sends it to the king, who reads it and is distraught when he reads the law, because he's like, oh my gosh, we are not doing any of this. God is going to be furious with us. So Josiah's response is to find a prophet in the area, and he happens to find a female prophetess who lived not too far from him, who was actually related to his wardrobe keeper. Her name was Huldah. So he sends some messengers to Huldah to see if Yahweh has a word for him, and Yahweh indeed had a word for Josiah. God tells Josiah through Huldah that he is very angry with Judah, that he is not going to relent in his anger. But he tells Josiah through Huldah, he's like, Josiah, because your heart was changed when you read my law, I am going to spare you from seeing all of the trouble I'm going to bring to Judah and Jerusalem. You're going to die in peace, but your descendants are in fact going to see this trouble brought on the land. And so the messengers take this back to King Josiah, who you would think might be relieved to hear this because he's not going to have to deal with anything. Josiah could have easily sat back in complacency and been like, oh, I'm relieved because I am not going to see the trouble God's going to bring on Jerusalem or Judah. I can just take a breather and just do whatever I want till I die. In fact, we saw a king respond in that way. King Hezekiah. A few kings ago, Hezekiah was actually a very good king, but he was very prideful and he made quite a few mistakes. And so God got angry at Hezekiah, and he's like, Hezekiah, I am going to bring calamity on Judah, but you're not going to see it. It's going to be on your sons. And Hezekiah was like, good. That is a good word from the Lord. And he was excited because he was not going to see the calamity brought on Judah, even though he was kind of the start of the cause of it. Josiah could have had that exact same response here. He does not. He has the opposite response. He's like, nope, I am going to religiously reform Judah and Jerusalem. So it says that the king went to Yahweh's house and brought the populace in to Yahweh's house for a mass reading of the law. Now, this was supposed to happen every 7 years. The priests were supposed to bring out God's Old Testament law and read it to the people every 7 years during the Feast of Booths. But apparently that had never happened. Not in Josiah's lifetime, not in Manasseh's lifetime, probably not in many, many kings' lifetime had the law actually been read to the populace of Israel. But Josiah does it. He does what God wants him to do by actually teaching the people about the law of God. So that's the first step that Josiah takes, is that he encourages the people to listen to the covenant of God. It says that the people listened to the covenant, and verse 3 mentions that the king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before Yahweh to walk after Yahweh and to keep his commandments, his testimonies, his statutes with all his heart and his soul, to confirm the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people agreed to the covenant. So the king makes a promise with God once again. He says, God, I personally am going to walk in your ways. That is what I want to do. I want to worship you only as my God. And the people sitting by listening to the covenant see the king make this promise to God, and they're just like, yes, this is great. We make a promise like that too. Man, how many times does scripture say that? The people agreed to this. And then 5 seconds later, the people are like, what? We didn't make that promise. I don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, the king, though, at least, King Josiah had a true heart of repentance. So immediately after promising God that he's going to follow God completely, it says the king in verse 4 commanded Hilkiah the high priest and the priests of the second order and the keepers of the threshold to bring out of Yahweh's temple all the vessels that were in there made for Baal, for Asherah, and for all the army of the sky. And he burned them outside of Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. And it sounds like Josiah did this immediately, possibly right after this whole reading of the law had taken place and he made this promise to God. It's very likely that Josiah was like, okay, Hilkiah, high priest, go get all the crap out of Yahweh's house, bring it to me, and I'm going to set it on fire outside of the town square. And that is what the priests all did. They carried out every idolatrous image that was in Yahweh's house. Now, Manasseh was the one who put all of those idolatrous images in God's house, including the Asherah pole, which was a sex cult, and the Baal altar, and the altar to all of these other like sky deities. The priests go and they bring them all out. And Josiah indeed burns them outside of the Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. You know, one thing I can say about Josiah was he was very courageous to do this. You know, this was at the peak of Israel's idolatry. King Manasseh was the one who put all of these things in place, and yet Josiah was unafraid, more so than any other king, unafraid to take these false gods that everybody was worshiping and idolizing and completely destroy them until they're nothing but ashes. And that shows right there how false these gods really were. Because if these gods were real, how could they burn to ashes? Of course they weren't real. They were just handmade images. And Josiah showed that they were just handmade images by burning them to ashes. And it says he carried their ashes to Bethel. It says he also got rid of the idolatrous priests, whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah and in the places around Jerusalem. The high places were nothing but areas where people could go to burn incense and burn offerings to whatever god they desired. Whether it was Yahweh or Asherah or Baal, it was just like little places along the way that people could go and burn their incense. But God wanted his people to come to the temple and do things the right way whenever they would bring a sacrifice. And there is many reasons for this. I think the first reason was to make sure that everything was done very orderly, that people weren't just worshiping Yahweh however they wanted in like very pagan ways, because pagan ideology and Yahwism do not mix. So Yahweh, of course, wanted people to do things his way. So that was the first reason. The second reason, I kind of think, even though this is not stated in scripture, was to cut down on animal cruelty. Because can you imagine if everybody had a altar in their backyard during these days when, animal sacrifices were the commonplace? People would just be slaughtering their animals left and right. There was already plenty of pointless sacrifices happening in these days. If people were just worshiping in their backyard on their homemade altar, pointless sacrifices would absolutely skyrocket. And that is what the high places represented as well. And not to mention the high places also were not just for Yahweh. There's probably plenty of altars to other gods where you could worship whatever god you wanted at the high places. Whether it was Yahweh or a fake idol, you could go there and worship, and that might tempt people who were Yahweh followers to worship a different idol, just to cover all of their bases. So God hated the high places. King Hezekiah initially tore them down, knowing that God hated them, but then Manasseh just built them right back up. So Josiah gets rid of them completely again. It says he got rid of the idolatrous priests who the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places. And it says he also got rid of the priests who burned incense to Baal, to the sun, to the moon, to the planets, and to all the army of the sky. So firstly, Josiah got rid of all of the altars out of Yahweh's house. Then he got rid of the idolatrous priests at all the high places in Yahweh's temple and anywhere else they were working around Judah and Jerusalem. And specifically with the Asherah pole, it mentions this in verse 6. He brought the Asherah pole from Yahweh's house outside of Jerusalem to the brook Kidron and burned it at the brook Kidron, beat it to dust, and cast its dust on the graves of the common people. Now, this was not an insult to the common people, but it was actually the opposite, because everybody knew in these days that a dead body defiled anything it touched. So it was a very insulting thing for Josiah to throw the Asherah dust onto graves because it was defiling the Asherah pole completely. And that's why you see in this very long paragraph here, Josiah often using dead men's bones or grave sites to really defile all of these idols. But for the Asherah pole specifically, not even for the Baal or the altar to the other like sky gods, the Asherah pole specifically got thrown on the graves of the people. And why do you think that is? Well, because, like I said, the Asherah cult was a sex cult, and it had been introduced into Yahweh's house, meaning that people could now go to Yahweh's house, not just to worship Asherah, but to perform detestable sex acts in God's house, specifically with male and female prostitutes. So homosexual acts, adulterous acts, any kind of sex act that you wanted, you just go to Yahweh's house, pay a fee to get a prostitute for yourself, whether male or female, and then you do the dirty in Yahweh's house, and whatever fee that you paid for that prostitute goes directly to the priests of that cult. So that is why the Asherah pole got such a nasty treatment from Josiah, was because he wanted to degrade it completely. Right after throwing the Asherah ashes on the graves, it says he goes back to Yahweh's house, and he, in verse 7, broke down the houses of the male shrine prostitutes that were in Yahweh's house, where the women wove hangings for the Asherah. Now, these hangings that they mentioned were probably some kind of curtain that the prostitutes would close when the sex acts were taking place. Okay, so Josiah got rid of all of that. He got rid of the brothel that was inside of Yahweh's house, tore it down completely, got rid of the male prostitutes, got rid of all of the woven hangings for this brothel as well. Then it says in verse 8 that he brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah and defiled the high places where the priests had burned incense. So now he targets the high places again, not just by removing the priests, but also by completely destroying the high places. He got rid of them totally. And then it says in verse 9 that the priests of the high places didn't come up to Yahweh's altar in Jerusalem, but they ate unleavened bread among their brothers. So all of the priests that were in charge of the high places were not allowed to serve at Yahweh's temple. They had done something wrong, but Josiah didn't fully get rid of their priesthood because they were Levite priests, right? Even though they were serving Yahweh incorrectly at the high places. So he allowed them to keep the title of priest, but they were not allowed to serve at Yahweh's temple. Instead, they ate unleavened bread among their brothers. So I think that means that they were still allowed to have some of the things that pertain to the priests, like the unleavened bread, but they weren't allowed to eat it at Yahweh's house. They had to eat it elsewhere, far away from Yahweh's house, because they did not honor the priesthood the way God commanded them to honor it. So then after this, in verse 10, it says, Josiah defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Moloch. Now, this, of course, is referring to the image of Moloch, you know, that statue I've talked about before on the podcast, where it was made of bronze and it had its hands extended out so that like a human infant could fit on those hands. And then the bronze statue was heated to a ridiculously high temperature, so much so that the flesh of the baby would start melting as it touched the hands of this image of this god Moloch. It says that Josiah defiled this Topheth and completely destroyed it. Then after this, he took away the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrance of Yahweh's house by the room of Nathan Melech, the officer who was in the court, and he burned the chariots of the sun with fire. Apparently, the kings of Judah, maybe many of them, actually dedicated these horses to the sun god. The sun was a major deity back in these days. In fact, the main deity of the Babylonians at this time was the sun god. So the sun was worshipped, I guess, through horses. And this was something that was kind of common in many Middle Eastern countries, was you dedicated horses to the sun And I'm not exactly sure why. I did not research that very well. But yes, horses apparently were dedicated to the sun. And it says here that the kings of Judah dedicated these horses to the sun. Now, it does not say that Josiah killed these horses. It says he took them away. So maybe he just like undedicated them and just sold them, or I don't know, used them himself. I don't know what he did with the horses, but he undedicated the horses, and then he destroyed the chariots that were dedicated to the sun in fire. Then it mentions in verse 12 that the king broke down the altars that were on the roof of the upper room of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars which Manasseh had made in the 2 courts of Yahweh's house, and beat them down from there and cast their dust into Brook Kidron. So this is talking about all of the altars that the Judean kings had dedicated to different deities that were around the palace. Josiah went into his own home and destroyed all of the altars that were found there. You know, these historical altars that his grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather had made. Josiah destroyed them all. And it says that he also defiled the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the mountain of corruption, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Sidonians, and for Chemish, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon. So lastly, Josiah goes and destroys the temples that Solomon had made for his wives, that were still around to this day, that even Hezekiah hadn't gotten rid of. Because maybe in the eyes of these other kings, these places were historical, you know, even though they were dedicated to false gods and places where people could go worship these false gods, maybe they were just historical places. But yet Josiah was like, no, we're going to tear everything down. He broke in pieces the pillars, cut down all the Asherah poles, and filled their places with men's bones. So he defiled every single area that he could find where these false idols had once been. And then Josiah goes so far to actually go up into Israel and destroy the altars that were there. He didn't just stay at Judah. He went up into Israel. It says that he went to Bethel and the high places which Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made. He broke down the altar and the high places, and he burned the high place and beat it into dust and burned the Asherah. So Josiah went so far with his religious reform that he even went up into Israel that was being occupied by Assyria at the time. He went to Bethel, and it sounds like he destroyed those calf gods that Jeroboam, the first king of Israel, had actually made. He completely wiped them off the planet, and he defiled them as well, because there was an altar there that you could burn things on. And it says that Josiah spotted some tombs that were in the mountain and ordered his men to go get some bones of the dead people so that he could burn the human bones on this altar. This is how far Josiah went, to completely erase idolatry out of Judah, Jerusalem, and even Israel. And not only erase it, but to defile it completely, embarrass anybody that still worshipped these false gods. It says that he took the bones out of the tombs, burned them on the altar, and defiled it according to Yahweh's word, which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed these things. And what that means is that a prophecy came true. And that prophecy is found in 1 Kings 13, when Jeroboam, who was the first king of Israel, was still king. It says an unnamed man of God came from Judah to Bethel as Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make an offering. By the word of the Lord, he cried out against the altar. Altar, altar, this is what the Lord says. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you. So when Jeroboam made this altar and was like sacrificing on it, this man of God came up and started prophesying against this altar, saying that somebody named Josiah someday in the future was going to sacrifice dead man's bones on this altar, completely defile the religion of Jeroboam, and also offer the priests of the high places on this altar. And that is exactly what Josiah is doing in 2 Kings 23. He is completely defiling Jeroboam's altar with these dead man's bones. So Josiah then is looking around, and he says in verse 17, "What monument is that which I see?" And the men of the city told him, "It is the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and proclaimed these things that you have done against the altar of Bethel." So basically, Josiah finds the tomb of that unnamed prophet who prophesied against Jeroboam's altar. And it's very possible that this unnamed prophet's prophecy was written on the monument, on his tombstone. And so maybe Jeroboam and the men are like reading this tombstone saying, this prophet prophesied that somebody in the future named Josiah was going to burn bones on Jeroboam's altar. It's just funny. It's very possible that Josiah didn't even know he was fulfilling a prophecy, and he realizes that it was a prophecy when he sees this monument of the man that actually prophesied that very thing. So Josiah says, "Let this man be, let no one move his bones." So they let his bones alone with the bones of the prophet who came out of Samaria. Josiah respected the bones of the prophets. In verse 19, it says, "All the houses also of the high places that were in the cities of Samaria, which the kings of Israel had made to provoke Yahweh to anger, Josiah took away and did to them according to all the acts that he had done in Bethel." So he destroyed all of the high places in Samaria as well, Israel's capital city. He also killed all the priests of the high places that were there on the altars and burned men's bones on them, and he returned to Jerusalem. So he killed all of the prophets of the high places in Samaria. Now, I don't know if he did the same thing in Judah, because it doesn't specifically say, from my understanding, that he killed any of the false prophets in Judah, but it says he did kill the ones that were in Samaria. And maybe the reason he did that was because he saw the prophecy on that monument. Or maybe Josiah had already decided he was going to do that because these false prophets had led the people astray, and now Israel was under the complete control of Assyria, and yet still these false prophets are getting away with everything that they did to hurt Israel. And so maybe that was another reason why Josiah killed all of these men. But regardless, it was a prophecy come true. So it says, when Josiah returned home, he commanded the people to keep the Passover to Yahweh, as it is written in the book of the covenant. And so the people kept the Passover, possibly for the first time in decades. Even though it was supposed to be a yearly occurrence, the people were not keeping the Passover. And Josiah told them, if you all claim, as you did, to follow Yahweh, you have to keep his Passover. And it says there was not kept such a Passover from the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel, nor in the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was kept to Yahweh in Jerusalem. Finally, the people did Passover the way God commanded them. And that was all through the prompting of Josiah. And it says also, not only did Josiah remove the high places, the idols, the Asherah poles, the Moloch image, he also removed those who had familiar spirits, the wizards and the teraphim, and the idols, and all the abominations that were in the land of Judah and Jerusalem, that he might confirm the words of the law which were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in Yahweh's house. So Josiah didn't stop there. He found everything that was an idol in Jerusalem and ordered it to go, even household idols, because that is what teraphim were just household idols. So anybody that was worshiping a different deity in their own homes, Josiah commanded them to bring out all of those idols and completely destroy them. He also got rid of anybody who had a familiar spirit, so witches and wizards, and any other kind of abomination that was found in the land of Judah and Jerusalem. It says there was no king like Josiah before him, who turned to Yahweh with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, and there was none like him who arose after him. So Josiah was the only king like this. he was the only king that completely turned to Yahweh and did everything he could to get his people to turn to Yahweh as well. Now, there were other good kings in Judah's history, Hezekiah specifically, and also King Asa. Not to mention King David was a very good king as well. But Josiah was different from those men in the fact that once he decided he was going to worship Yahweh, that is what he did. He just had tunnel vision, basically. He set his sights on Yahweh, and that is what he was going to do. Now, the rest of the acts of Josiah and all that he did, aren't they written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went out against him. But Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo when he saw him. So I'm not going to go too much into that story because the Chronicles talk a lot more about Josiah's death. But basically, Josiah believed that Pharaoh Necho was going up against Judah, and Josiah went out to confront him, even though Josiah basically got a warning from God that he should not do it. Josiah still went out and did it. So yes, no matter how good somebody might be at following God, you always make mistakes. Josiah made a mistake at the end of his life, did not listen to a warning from God, and ended up getting killed at the end of his life by Pharaoh Necho. And so his servants carried him dead in a chariot from Megiddo, brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. The people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him, and made him king in his father's place. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 9 months in Jerusalem. All it says about him is that he did evil in Yahweh's sight, according to all that his fathers had done. So basically, he did everything that the kings before him had done that Josiah was trying to get rid of. Jehoahaz, Josiah's son, just went right back to worshiping other gods. But Pharaoh Necho, who killed Josiah, comes into Judah and actually forces Judah to start paying tribute to Egypt. And so Pharaoh Necho decommissioned King Jehoahaz, brought Jehoahaz to Egypt, probably put him either in house arrest or prison for the rest of his life, and then appointed another son of Josiah to reign in his place. It says in verse 34 that Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. He took Jehoahaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. So we don't really know exactly what happened to Jehoahaz after this, but he died in captivity at Egypt. So Jehoiakim, in the meantime, gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh every year, paid that tribute, and he taxed the land to give the money to Pharaoh. So he was not a very good king. Nobody likes taxes. But it also says that he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, according to all that his fathers had done. So unfortunately, Josiah's religious reform did not translate to the next generation. They just went straight back to doing everything terrible that the kings before them had done. I'm not gonna lie, I did not expect this episode to go on for as long as it did. I guess it makes sense. We did cover a very long chapter today, but I don't know. I misjudged this chapter. Maybe there was a place I could have broken it up and, done 2 episodes out of this chapter instead of 1. But you just get an extra long episode today. Anyway, faithful listeners, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And I'll see you guys tomorrow as we discuss Ephesians. But faithful listeners, don't forget to check out all the links in the description of this episode. And I will see you guys tomorrow, 6 a.m. or whenever you choose to wake up and listen. Until tomorrow, happy listening and God bless.